So the deeper and deeper I've gotten into my reread of The Wheel of Time, I'm uncovering more and more people who have some very different opinions than I was aware of had even existed. And part of this is probably because I read these books in a bubble, years and years and years ago, and the internet wasn't what it is today. And so I just wasn't aware of things until I got around to redoing the reread that I'm doing right now ahead of the rewatch of season one and prepping for season two's Amazon show. But anyway, there's this article over on Tor called "How the Wheel of Time Made Me Hate Epic Fantasy and How Mistborn Brought Me Back." And while a lot of this has some extraneous, stuff related to the author's personal life, there is some really good information in here that I want to kind of sift through today. Not the least of which is this idea that. Well, hello, you come in here. By the way, this is Pippin, everybody. For those of you who have been following long term, she's finally feeling. She had an abscess burst on her stomach after she got spayed. It got infected. She had emergency surgery a week ago. No, sorry, 2 weeks ago. She got her stitches out last Tuesday, and today officially is the first day. We've been using just bandanas just to keep her wrapped up. Everything. Today's the first day I've taken her bandage off completely, like completely, let her rain. She's been having the zoomies for the last 30 minutes in the office, so I'm trying to keep her occupied while I'm sitting here recording videos. I've got a white spot on my microphone because she knocked it into the wall and the paint, and yeah, it's all sorts of fun. Anyway, let's dive in. The article starts to get to the interesting point for me, or at least the point that's relevant for my topic. Talking about how there was this lull in epic fantasy publishing around 2008. Robert Jordan had passed. Um, you're looking at a lull in um, publishing because Rothfuss book and George R. R. Martin and these guys notoriously take forever to get books out. There was also the writers' strike, meaning there was no television coming out. And so the idea of that, the world of epic fantasy was somehow failing, it might have felt large to this individual. And so that sort of caused an issue with them starting to feel like epic fantasy was meh. And then they came to the issue that should, from deep within the cave of my subsequent announcement about the progress of the Wheel of Time, took on a cynical edge. The first book would be released in November 2009, they said, but then Brandon Sanderson said he needed to reread the series before he could even start writing it. Then he changed the target word rate to 250,000 words. Then it became 400,000 words, and then it wasn't coming out in 2009 at all. And then it wasn't even going to be one book, but three. And they were ditching Jordan's title and calling the last book Tarman Gaiden, and so on and so forth. And although our Tor and Sanderson were attempting to be communicative and clear in a way that had never been before attempted with the series, I just felt like I was being toyed with. The Wheel of Time was already famous for avoiding resolutions. How was it that Jordan's absence was somehow magnifying this aspect of the series? So, fuck it. I wasn't going to read it anymore, or epic fantasy at all anymore. I wasn't going to support this type of behavior. I hadn't read a word of it since 2005 anyway, and now it was 2009, and my life was completely different and horrible, and A Dance with Dragons was obviously never coming out either, and if I couldn't explore the sort of these fantasy worlds, then fuck it. Fuck all of it. So here's the funny part. Um, I have told people who have been around for a while, anybody who's been around my channel for a while has heard me say this on multiple occasions. I don't read fantasy series that are incomplete anymore. And there are two writers in particular who caused me to stop reading book series that are not finished anymore. George R. R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss. Um, I am not going to sit and wait in anticipation for 10 fucking years while you have writer's block and figure out how to get over it, or you go off and do all those other projects and other things. If you, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Um, I love Game of Thrones, and as a late teen, ravaged the Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire series, until I realized that, oh, he got the first ones out really quickly, and then it took him like, I don't remember, it was like 7 or 8 years for one, and then after that one was this. It's a bigger gap, and then it became a bigger, and it's just like I gave up. I was like, I'm not gonna do it. Um, the idea that I should be waiting for a decade for an author to complete the next book in their epic fantasy series is ridiculous. And I can say that as a writer. Um, I may not be published to the extent that those guys are published, but I have been making a living as a writer since 2008. And I have completed somewhere in the ballpark of 20 million words of content published for clients around the world, books, magazine articles, blog posts, newsletters. It doesn't matter. Being paid to write is what I've been doing for a very long time. Regardless of what project you're working on, you have outlines, you have deadlines, and you just make it work. Stephen King is probably one of my favorite authors to look at in terms of sheer productivity. Also, Brandon Sanderson, Kevin J. Anderson. In terms of guys who just get shit done, they have outlines and they just go. And it might not always be perfect, but at least they reliably publish content on a regular basis. And this is an issue where Robert Jordan also struggled, which was creating something that's so massive in scope that it's manageable in the early stages because you're still creating. But by the time you're midway through, you suddenly come to this moment where you realize, "Oh my God, I've created this monster that has 500 heads. How am I going to resolve this story?" And they lose the plot. Now, Jordan admirably continued to push through, and while I will admit that books 7 through 10 are somewhat of a slog, and this article, I think this article, they call it bloat here. Um, yeah, here it talks about here. Robert Jordan very visibly struggled with the momentum of his fantasy world. The middle portions of the book, books through 7 through 10, riddled what is known these days as bloat, an overly intense focus on secondary or tertiary characters at the expense of the main characters. Bloat becomes a bigger and bigger issue on fantasy series as they continue forward, as background characters prove too vibrant to ignore or a situation arises that can't be solved via a simple battle. Bloat is not a purposeful choice that the author makes. Bloat is a demand that a fantasy world makes of its creator and is always supported by the momentum of that world. Bloat is an author attempting to mollify his world and his readers all at once, which I thought was a brilliant way of talking about it because this is so true. Every writer of epic fantasy deals with this. Good outlining can help you avoid that. And I feel like in some cases, Robert Jordan probably didn't have an outline, and I feel like George R. R. Martin probably doesn't have an outline either. I feel like these guys maybe have a rough um, sort of idea of where the story needs to go and maybe some story beats written down, but then they just sort of let the secondary characters go where they will. I don't do that. A lot of other writers don't do that. Kevin J. Anderson is notorious for he is very strict on his outline, and then he breaks the outline down into chapter synopses, and then goes out and writes the chapters based on those synopses and doesn't really alter from that. And as a result, he's able to crank out book after book after book after book after book after book after book after, and I could go on, because he's just reliable and he structures it in such a way that there is no bloat. He's trimmed all of the fat off of it. I like to let characters explore a little bit, but you do need to have a structured outline. Otherwise, you're going to run into this problem right here. And I love this part here where they talk about his own negotiations with the Wheel of Time began in A Crown of Swords, where the reader can see in the sheer number of plot lines that Rand has to deal with. Suddenly, Rand needs to solidify his rule to the nation of Carrion, support Elaine's ascension to the crown, deal with the Aes Sedai who captured him, figure out how to interact with Rebel Tower, make sure the Black Tower isn't going crazy, stop Cadswan from driving him crazy, stop his own magic power from driving him crazy, figure out how he feels about the women in his life, figure out the purpose of the Ale people, hunt down the Shadow, figure out how to stop the Endless Summer from baking the planet, oust the big bad Samael from Ilion, unite all the nations of Land and the Sea Folk, and decimate or make peace with the Sanchin, and when also Paid and Fate is still lurking out, get ready, ready to get slashy. And that's just Rand's storyline. Never mind that readers were also expected to spend time with Perrin, Mat, Egwene, and Nynaeve. 7 books in, the focus of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time had turned incontrovertibly towards its world and away from its characters. And it says here, as a result, books 7 through 11 read like one long book with a fractured narrative that came very close to scuttling the entire series. Um, and of course, everyone kind of agrees that he regained his footing with Knife of Dreams, but his skill as a writer got arguably better, and I would agree that that's definitely true. Um, and this is when the author of this particular article talks about, as the release date for The Gathering Storm approached, curiosity overcame my extreme cantankerousness, and I checked out Brandon Sanderson's first Mistborn novel, known these days by the subtitle of Final Empire. I had never heard of Sanderson before he was chosen to shepherd the Wheel of Time, and I was curious what kind of writer he was, blah, 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 blah. It says Mistborn is the complete opposite of the Wheel of Time, and in its only 400 or so pages, I found a response to my frustrations regarding epic fantasy. The characters in Mistborn talk plainly to each other. They answer questions put to them, and in short, so here's what it is. Here's what this is. Brandon Sanderson is a notorious outliner. He loves to outline. He meticulously, like Kevin J. Anderson, details things down to the exact last little minutia in outline format, and then goes forth and writes that outline and fills in the gaps between. But there's not a lot of fat on those bones because he's doing it in an extremely structured way. She's finally falling asleep, guys. This is a good thing. At least she doesn't have the zoomies anymore. Um, I think she was just excited because she had the bandage off for the first time, like completely. Instead of just taking it off to wash, the scar and everything. I took it off this morning and let her run around, and she was like, "Oh my God, freedom!" Um, this is where we can get into the discussion about how outlines really help writers, because Brandon Sanderson has talked publicly about how he does this. Um, so if you read through um, this blog post at leisure, and I'm going to put it down below because it is worth reading in the full context of the writer explaining, their personal life stuff that affected their mentality towards epic fantasy. But even if you strip that out, I think a lot of us have started to feel, or had started to feel at some point in time, sort of a disassociation or a disillusionment, with epic fantasy, because writers who were taking 10 years between books, or guys like Robert Jordan who lost the plot and create 3 books in a row that are just like, 3, 4 books in a row that are just like, ugh, really? A slog to get through. And again, I love The Wheel of Time. It's my favorite book series of all time. I regard Robert Jordan as one of my favorite writers of all time. Um, but even I recognize that there was, and a lot of people put the blame on Harriet as his editor, and I don't think that's a fair judgment to make. I think it's just an issue with, um, I said that she was calming down. I know she's biting my headset cable. Um, it's just an issue with an author who didn't, I think, an author who didn't outline enough or allowed their book to start swaying too much from the original vision and let secondary characters take precedence. And you can't do that. You just have to stick to your guns and stick to your outline and get it done. Because at the end of the day, that's your job, sort of, as a writer. And I mean, I really have to take that back though, because it just depends on the project as well. Because I've had projects where I'm allowed creative reign to just do what I want, and that can be fun. But it can also be extremely unwieldy, because if you're not careful, those secondary characters can take the spotlight and become main characters. And now suddenly you're adding more POV characters to the list, and you end up with the Robert Jordan issue where you have hundreds of POV characters as opposed to only having half a dozen. Food for thought. I thought this was a really good article. I wanted to share it with everybody. For those of you who might not have read it, give my own perspective on things. I'm still in New Spring. I'm taking my time. I don't read a lot these days. I try to read a few chapters per week, but I don't read every day because I do this every day. I have, a full-time job on YouTube doing content creation and streaming. So this takes precedence because it pays the bills, and I read in between that. Um, but I'm plugging away to New Spring because I'm doing a reread of the first of that plus the first 3 books of the Wheel of Time. And so as I'm doing that, I'm doing research and reading stuff like this, and it's fascinating to me. Anyway, if you've got to the end, I realize I never did my intro. I'm Renfell, for those of you who don't know, and if you've gotten to the end, you didn't know all that, and you haven't already done so, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. And hopefully, by the time you've gotten to the end here, you're inspired to support like all of these amazing people. Keeps me on the air, keeps me full time, keeps the kittens fed, pays for their surgery. Yeah. Um, it's really simple. On a premiere like this, where we're hanging out and chatting, you could do super chats and stickers during the premiere and live streams. You can also do super thanks down there on the videos after they've been uploaded. And you can also join as a member of the Adventurers Guild if you want to do the membership options here on YouTube. We have 3 different tiers. We do a lot of fun stuff for our members. And there's also a Patreon page where you can check out my work as a fantasy author as well as what I'm working on with my wife and my brother. There's not just a book series, there's also the 5th edition tabletop setting and source book, and there is the point and click adventure game. So you can check all that stuff out. And hopefully, I'll see everybody in the next episode with more of Pippin and her 6 siblings, the rescue cats that we crazily took on. Um, so, yeah, happy reading, everybody. See you next time.